Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Atlas Grazing. We're really excited to be here today to showcase the new evolution in grazing management technology that we've got here at Atlas Grazing. My name is Victoria Lawrence. I am your host for today. I've been with the team for about 7 years now and very proudly am joined by some of my co-hosts here. Bart Davidson, our Chief Grazing Officer, and Emily Mosley, our Grazing Solutions Advisor. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Vic.
Thanks, Vic. I'm just wondering whose idea were those, Nick? Shout out.
Oh, I think they're great. Emily was actually debating whether she puts one on for
I know,
today.
I nearly did. I nearly did.
We have
Right.
issues with the tying of that and making it look good. It needs work. But no, those photos are actually a nice little story because we are going to start with the origins of MaiaGrazing, and that was taken at Wilmot at their field day a couple of weeks ago. We'll get into that in just a second, but I wanted to just go over the agenda for today. So we will talk about the MaiaGrazing legacy. If you have joined us for the first time, you might be hearing about MaiaGrazing or Atlas Grazing for the first time. If you have been in our hemisphere for a while, then you will know very well what MaiaGrazing is. It is the platform that we built about 10 years ago that Bart will talk about very shortly. And then we'll talk about the evolution of Atlas Grazing and how we've ended up with the redevelopment of our grazing management tool. We'll talk about some core product features so you can get a good understanding of what Atlas Grazing has under the hood, and then what's next, where we are out and about in the field, and how you can get in touch with us and learn more about Atlas Grazing. So, Bart, let's throw to you first of all the MaiaGrazing legacy. Now, you've been a very big part of this. I feel like MaiaGrazing was built out of your brain and put into a platform. Do you want to take us through why it was built in the first place and a bit of the history of that tool?
Sure, Vic. Happy to, love to. Uh, you know, the king is not dead. Long live the king. I think that what we're talking about here is evolution. What we're talking about here is crazy change in landscapes. I recall back now thinking, literally, being in the room with a bunch of tech heads at the time who were saying that the technology that we're going to build this thing on is the latest and the greatest, and it's the best, and it'll last forever. And look at us now, and we're going, wow, AI, look how quickly the world has moved. And a decade plus, whatever, 13, 14 years ago, is a lifetime times 10 in technology. So it's a long time between drinks in terms of the underlying architecture and foundations and the wiring and the piping of things that pull numbers together, which is what we're ultimately talking about here, and entwining those numbers around some instinct and some grazing activities and decision making ultimately that I could talk to for sure.
Absolutely. And do you want to sort of take me back to the grazing management side of things and how you've come across really needing or identifying that we needed a tool to be able to help producers manage that better?
Yes, I I recall, you know, people will say they saw this business and that business evolve from some kid in a garage. That was definitely not the case for Maya. Maya was really born out of some pain. It was born out of a need. It was born out of uh, a problem that needed to be solved. And hard to believe now, as I was just talking about that change in technology for you millennials out there, literally the problem that Maya solved for was pencils and paper. 2013 was the trigger year. Uh, as I recall, a farm, multiple stakeholders. It's funny in retrospect now, we think that the millennial drought was a thing. The 2019 drought was pretty harsh in Eastern Australia, but 2013 caught a lot of us unawares. A missed spring. I won't go into details other than to say I really remember phone calls for a particular property where there were multiple stakeholders and decisions couldn't be made about pulling the trigger. Some circa $2,000 a head heifers were fed $1 million worth of feed. There were some tough conversations. The data was there, the Excels, the bits and bobs, the pens and paper and everything in between. But those animals were sold for $400 a head with their heads cut off not too long after the grass ran out, the feed ran out, just the following season failed, and that was the trigger. How does that never happen again? So it was not some whiz kid in the garage, that's for sure. And that was the trigger. It began from there. It was attempting to solve that problem of decision making, removing the angst, providing some objectivity, real objectivity around some tough decisions when it comes to running what are, usually multi-million-dollar properties with a lot on the table and a lot of us running off instinct, and that's what we needed to deal with.
I think some of the best innovation, particularly in agriculture, has come from that place of pain and really, like you said, not wanting to ever be that again. When it comes to why we should evolve, what's been your understanding of how Maia was built, why we do need to evolve, and sort of where the technology needs to go to help producers in this modern day?
Absolutely. It's astounding how fast technology is changing. There's absolutely no two ways about that. And, again, I don't want to be the old man in the room reflecting on the past, but I remember when people couldn't find the on button on the computer. I remember support saying, you just turn it off and you turn it back on. It's literally hard to believe now, but that's where we were with the same product. And so, the architecture, the underlying foundations, the basic wiring and plumbing of the building is older. It still functions. It still does its numbers. It still does its thing. And Maia solved for what was, and I still think is, some difficult thinking. Multi-dimensional algorithms that really do some number crunching that is hard to do, if not impossible to do in your head. You can do it on a calculator and you can do it in a few different Excels, but that's the problem it solved for. But it wasn't easy. It solved for the thinking, but it was always going to be a challenge. And we've got to recognise we built Maia proudly for the top end users. We built it for the really proficient, HM, holistic management, trained and educated practitioners out there that have been real leaders in what is now the regenerative space. Wasn't called that back a while ago. That evolution, really, for me, if I step back and I think about the maths of it all, because that's where I'm always drawn, the patterns, the cycles, what's different, what's changing. I think that the key element in this is that we were the first to go graze centric. We were the first to move to a grass focus in software and recognize that livestock, absolutely important, critical, in fact, but it's a grass centric focus if we're going to be in this game for decades and decades with an asset that improves through time. And that's the evolution. If we don't get the livestock right, if it's hard, if it's not easy to pull it out on your phone with a couple of clicks, without it being a different app, that's why we needed to evolve. And that's where Atlas Grazing has jumped in, filled that opportunity to be a graze centric platform focused utterly on the graze. The beautiful events that a graze represents that we just don't see out there in the market. It helps us work out stocking rate and all the insights that come from that, but in such a way that now it's evolved and we can do the transactions, we can sell them, buy them, change the demand, be comfortable with the demand, really stay on top of the demand side, i.e. the animal, on the mobile, on the web, and have it in a seamless way, which was always going to be a challenge with Maia. It's doable and it's been done and it can be, but it's always harder on that older architecture, and that's the fundamental difference. I would like to think that Maia solved for the thinking, and it did. It was tough, and at the time it was a bit of a groundbreaking move. But Atlas Grazing, it solves for the doing. It solves for the livestock seamless transition into the graze, and then the grazing insights flow from that.
Yeah, really well put, Bart. I think it's one of those things where we built Maia for what we think is the true challenges of grazing, but it wasn't always capturing all the other elements that we know people need to capture and want to capture on a daily basis and a weekly basis. And so making this accessible to everyone has always been our goal, and to do that on different platforms as well out in the paddock. With that in mind, I will hand over to Emily Mosley. Welcome, Emily. And I'll let you talk about some of our core product features. As our MaiaGrazing success lead, would you like to talk about what this looks like?
Thanks, Vic. And yeah, thank you, Bart, for providing such a wonderful background to MaiaGrazing and what it's done to support graziers and ranchers across the globe for the last decade. My parents were actually some of the first MaiaGrazing customers. I think they were number three, Bart's told me, cab off the rank. So I've grown up watching it being used in real life grazing observations and decision making. And I've sort of come full circle, spending the last 12 months talking to farmers and ranchers across the globe and helping them get started down that path with MaiaGrazing. And now I think, Bart, you put it beautifully. MaiaGrazing did the thinking, and now we're stepping into the future, and Atlas Grazing is supporting more people to do the doing. And now we get to explore our new product, Atlas Grazing, which is really exciting. So I'm going to take you through a quick walkthrough of Atlas Grazing today and show you how it helps map your farm, track your livestock, plan your grazing, and forecast ahead. The aim of tracking all of these records is so that you have the data to make confident decisions that ultimately drive productivity and profitability in your operation. So we'll cover off 4 key areas that support you to achieve those outcomes. Our digital map, our paddock and livestock records, our graze planning, and we'll finish up with our forecasting and scenario planning. Please feel free to drop any questions in the chat while we go through. We can answer those for you throughout the session, or we can end with our Q&A. So when you launch Atlas Grazing, you land on the overview dashboard, which is essentially the central hub of the platform. You'll see your digital map, property insights, and any upcoming tasks. And the digital map gives you that live view of what's happening across the property. You can see your mob locations, as well as map out infrastructure across the farm. So things like water tanks, troughs, gates, sheds, and more. You can click directly onto your paddocks in the map, and you can view records and insights here. You can see the recent and historical graze activity as we scroll back through. And you can also filter to a date range if you're wanting to look back at a certain period. So this allows you to view those records at a certain time frame, and we can pull out the things that you need there. Jumping into the info tab, you get that overview of your cumulative graze metrics and productivity of that paddock. So data such as your rolling rainfall, average yields, and recovery. And basically, at a glance, we can see exactly how our pastures are performing and link that to real-time observations while you're in the paddock. Likewise, you can click into your mobs from the map, and that's where we can see the breakdown of our stock groups within that mob. We can jump into the stock group and view our inventory records, so births, deaths, purchases, sales, joining periods. And a really cool addition to Atlas Grazing is that we can plan out those feed demand changes through the reproductive cycle, so you're always prepared and supplying optimum nutrition to livestock. Back in our mob record, we can see the recent and historical grazes, moves that have been completed, as well as planned upcoming moves as well. An example of that one there. So Atlas Grazing becomes that single digital source of truth for the property and anyone who is involved in the operation. The desktop version that we're seeing here is supported by our new mobile app. So you've got a couple of screen grabs there for some examples. We've designed Atlas Grazing with an app-first approach, and it means that it will work offline in the paddock, and you can capture your records as they happen without needing connectivity. And ultimately, that means that you're not trying to remember everything later on when you're back in the office. It's captured in real time while you're out and about. But did you have anything to add there in terms of the ops side of things?
I really think if back through time, being the old man in the room, one of the things that really does stand out to me is how important that demand side is, the rating, the ease of updating, or not even needing to update because it's weight-based and ADG linked. And so what I'm talking about there is the LSU or the DSE per animal, per stock group, per mob, per paddock, per graze, rolling it all up and avoiding that need to have that as a monthly or other step for people to go through, which I think is a healthy one always, for sure. But just, yeah, it's just getting a bit smarter, a bit simpler. Love it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll dive a little deeper now and take a look at our paddock and livestock tabs. So in our paddock tab here, we get that line item breakdown of each of our paddocks and an overview of their grazing performance. The status here indicates how long a paddock has been in graze if it's green, or how long it's been in recovery if it's blue. We can compare the metrics of our paddocks and look at insights such as our average density, yield, 12-month rolling yield, average graze duration, and average recovery period. We can filter those metrics. So if you're wanting to drill down into certain numbers, it's really easy to focus on the things you want to see and track those productivity changes. We can also filter to look at specific paddock groups. So if you're wanting to look more closely at similar areas, we can do that as well. And like we saw when we jumped into our paddocks from the map, we can see the full paddock breakdown and details here too. We'll jump into our paddock performance. So this is really where we start to take those simple day-to-day records and turn them into actionable, measurable insights. The first insight here is our yield over time. This is essentially telling that story about our grazing productivity over a certain date range. So this allows us to track our total grazing yield and ultimately see whether that trend line is heading up or down. And again, we can filter that to look at particular months or years, so we can track how we're changing with time. And you can see that we're, in this example, looking at that year-to-year basis here. Next, we have our feed availability chart. So where we have supplied feed estimates into Atlas Grazing, it will budget out how long that feed will last based on our current livestock inventory. So in this example, by the start of May, we're running into that feed deficit situation there. This tool is really a fantastic insight into how we're planning and making decisions in our grazing operation. So if I'm seeing that deficit start to creep up on the chart here, it might be that early indicator that we need to think about adjusting our stocking rate before we get into that tight spot. And ultimately, having the data to spot that potential tight spot allows us to plan and make decisions early and proactively. So jumping into our livestock tab, so stock, very like Maya mobs, organized within stock groups within our mobs. So for example, you might have a mob of trade lambs and then under that different vendor groups or purchase dates, for example, or a mob of breeder cows, and within that mob, each of your year drops. That's all customizable and you can organize it however suits you. You can track your inventory records both on desktop and the app. So purchases, sales, births, deaths, lost and found records. And the app becomes that central place to manage your livestock movements and numbers. So again, like we saw on the map, we can click into our mob to see the full details and breakdown. And because livestock inventory and grazing records are connected, Atlas Grazing can automatically calculate metrics like feed consumed and stocking rate, DSE demand. Again, all of this can be directly updated from the mobile app while you're in the paddock, which just makes keeping those records up to date so much easier. But anything to add on the, I guess, livestock paddock graze metric side of things?
Yeah, I don't think you realise how sexy that is, Emily. Like, if I think back again, I'm the old guy in the room, but I think about the simple things and the language that I hear on farms that are doing really well. I'm a fortunate person. I get to see a lot of farms and I spend time listening to how people describe their farms. And one of the things that I hear on farms that I've come to learn as being pretty successful is that they know how to describe the way that grass gets consumed. And those were the things that you were talking about there. I think your account needs a bit of an update. You've got some paddocks with a few misses there that you need to get on
I
top of.
I do. Dodgy demo account, Bart.
You've been too busy. And so, but key point though, there are some key elements there that I would really encourage people that may feel a bit off the pace in terms of that understanding of language. And it's really simple things that you just pointed at in the metrics. And it's really no more complicated than I call it ready. It's recovery, duration, density, and yield, and you've covered them there. And they come out of this seamlessly. We always struggled to have them in a seamless way through Maia's, again, because of that early architecture and flexibility that we now have with Atlas Grazing. But that's key. That's foundational. That's understanding how you consume the grass that you've already got. Then to the livestock, yeah, that's it's a whole different world, right? I mean, we have to be able to compete with the livestock management systems out there, and I think we've done that. We took that on, and that was core to the undertaking. And well, bully ho, I think it's pretty good to be able to do all of those transactions on the mobile versus needing to be on the web app. It's logical. It's the demand side. It has to flow through for the grey stuff to be as sexy as I just described it. So I'm pretty cool with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bart. I love when you call Atlas Grazing sexy. So we'll jump into our Graze planner now, and this gives you that simple overview of our current grazes, our upcoming mob moves, and our grazing history. And again, that paddock status, either green for days in graze or blue showing that days since last graze or that time in recovery. So Atlas Grazing automatically orders our paddocks based on which have had the longest rest. So your paddocks will, with the longest rest, are always sitting at the top of this list here. And that makes it really easy to identify that next best move or the next best paddock to graze. We can customize those columns for different things that you may like to see. A lot of people like to track 12-month rolling yield while they're doing their graze plans, so we can view that there. At the moment, we're in our weekly view, so each block here on this graze chart represents one day. We can switch into our monthly view, and those blocks will show as hourly intervals. So this is really helpful if you are someone who's doing multiple moves a day. We'll just jump back into the weekly demo view for this demo. And the next part is our graze planning. So planning a graze is really straightforward. We've got two different methods which we'll quickly run through. The first is our paddock recovery target. So this allows us to rate paddocks from best to worst and plan our grazes accordingly. Very simple to do. We pop in that start date for our graze rotation, set the recovery period and the number of rotations that we want to do, choose the mob or mobs that we want to include in that plan, and then we tick our paddocks from the list here that we want to include in our graze rotation. And then we simply give them a score 1 to 10. So 1 being our very best paddock and 10 being our worst. You'll see that that's color coded. And we've also got our little descriptor there as well as a guide. And based on that rating that we've given there, Atlas Grazing will automatically calculate the optimum graze and recovery period. So you can see we can review that plan. It's showing me the graze and days in recovery, and we can make any changes or edits that we need to before we save and put that plan on our chart. And our next option in terms of graze planning is our feed on offer tool. So this uses your actual pasture estimates to plan your graze periods. Very similar to the last tool. Set that start date, pop in our target residual, choose the mobs and or mob or mobs that we want to use in that graze rotation. And then again, select the paddocks that we want to use from our list on the graze chart. And then the difference here, as opposed to giving those paddocks a rating 1 to 10, we give them a feed estimate. The great thing here is that if you don't have that on hand, we've got our long-term average there, so we can plan around that average sort of yield that we are getting. So we'll use that just as a rough example for this demo here. Pop in those feed estimates, and then we can preview that plan on the chart as well. And this will show us, again, that graze duration and the rest period that we're targeting there. Once we're happy, we can save that. So those moves will appear as planned grazes, and they won't become official records until they are confirmed that they've actually happened. So it means that you can plan ahead but still stay flexible, because we know grazing plans rarely go to plan. And so if something doesn't happen as you planned it to, we can simply just edit or delete that move here. The system will flag if a mob has stayed in a paddock longer than planned, so you can keep on top of your records. And the Graze Planner is designed to work with you and work on the fly. It's a really powerful tool that allows you to juggle your livestock needs, feed availability, and your operational requirements with ease. But I'll throw to you again just to make sure I've covered off everything there.
Good on you, Em. Like the guy I'd say is that this is never going to meet the needs of the absolute top end HM trained practitioners at the moment. It's a work that is really moving ahead. It's critical and a big part of where we're going here. Having said that, the win here is the flexibility. Planning out grazes, planning out the allocation of animals for paddocks through time in multiple sequences is a thing. It's difficult to code for, and that's why Maya was always a challenge and still achievable, but a challenge. Whereas the flexibility that we get here changes that, and it's power on, keep rocking.
Thanks, Bart. And last but certainly not least is our forecasting and performance insights. Really, what we're asking here with this tool is, are we stocked appropriately for the season ahead? So the Graze pressure chart here tracks our rainfall data. Blue bars are our monthly totals. Line is our rolling rainfall. Benchmark carrying capacity is the dotted line here. And our Graze pressure is either red or green, depending on whether we're above or below that benchmark carrying capacity. We can look at this data on a 5 or 10-year view, or we can filter down to our 12 months here and over specific date ranges as well. So the tool is designed to help you identify when you might need to make a change in your stocking rate. An example of how we do that is with our 12-month view here. So grey, we're looking at the retrospective area, and white, we're looking at that upcoming 6 months ahead of us. So in this example, we're actually tracking pretty nicely. Our stocking rate is green all the way out to July. And it means that we're sitting just below our benchmark carrying capacity. So we've got enough feed to supply the stock that we've got on hand, but we're also really effectively utilising the pasture that we are growing. If our stocking pressure starts to push above our benchmark carrying capacity, Atlas Grazing will highlight that in red. And there's an example of that back in December in this case. So if I was seeing that red jump like that out in our forecast, I would take that as an early signal that we need to adjust our stocking numbers. We can drill down into our monthly data, have a look at those metrics more closely. So here we can see those insights around our rainfall, change in feed demand, and our grazing pressure when compared to our benchmark carrying capacity. This data is absolutely critical when we are making decisions around seasonal variabilities and stocking rates. Ensuring that we balance that stocking rate and our benchmark carrying capacity is what's going to drive increased ground cover, better water capture, increased stock performance, and ultimately moves the needle on our grazing productivity and business profitability. And for me, that's really what it's all about. And to further support us to do that and our adaptability, we can run seasonal scenarios. So example here is our basic scenario modeling. So what happens if our rainfall drops to 50% of the average over the next couple of months? We can see that our stocking rate starts to jump up above our benchmark carrying capacity quite quickly. So if we remove 50% of our feed demand, we can start to flatten out that curve and come back down towards our benchmark carrying capacity. We can model this from different points in the year using the date controls here. And we can also get into our advanced modeling controls as well. So this allows us to plan destocking scenarios for specific animal groups. So we'll run through a quick example. We'll name our scenario. So we'll just give it a name. In this case, autumn 2026. We're going to sell some ewes. We'll add that rainfall forecast. So I'm feeling like it's going to be potentially a bit of a dry year. I'm very sure it will be in our case. And we select the mobs that we want to sell from. So we set that start date as well. Apologies, I skipped a step in there. Select those stock groups. And the really powerful thing here is we can drill down to the specific animals and numbers that we want to destock. So in this case, I know out of our 2023 ewes, I've got about 500 that are saleable and ready to go. And from our 2024 ewes, there's about 450 dries in there they can go to. So we'll add those numbers in, we'll save that scenario, and then we can draw that on the chart. So this becomes a really simple way to pressure test your decisions before the season forces us to make that decision. And these tools are designed to support your decision making and ultimately drive those better outcomes for our profitability and our productivity in our business. So we can see here in this example, we have modeled what the impact of decreasing those numbers would be. We've brought that line down a little bit, but it actually hasn't quite been enough. So this is a really, really interesting case of, do we need to go back and adjust further? Are we going to play it by ear? Ultimately, what I want our customers to have is the data to make those decisions confidently, play with different seasonal outcomes and see what we can do with different scenarios. But I'll throw to you while that last one is loading there, and I'll see if there's anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, it makes me think of a few things, Emily. Number one, that heart in mouth moment when you've got new development and knowing the complexity that was built behind the multiple interdependencies that build a forecasting tool like this. I think the win is the simplicity. Forecasting is genuinely one of the more challenging tasks that sits in front of a grazier. I will honestly say, I don't think there's been any other trigger in my life that has caused grown men to cry in front of me than not following through on the forecasting of stocking rate to carrying capacity through a tough time. It's one of the memories that this triggers, as does new development and knowing that developers are looking at this saying, how do we improve those axes so that it's an easier read deal, and that's what they're working on now. I think ultimately the principle of this is what matters intrinsically, and that is being in control of those decision-making processes and not being scared of it. And that's what we're seeking to achieve here.
Yeah, absolutely, Bart. I couldn't agree more. So that is essentially a quick overview of Atlas Grazing. As a recap, the platform will help you to map your farm infrastructure and track your mob locations, track your livestock inventory and moves and your paddock performance, plan out those mob moves and grazing rotations, and forecast different seasonal conditions and the stocking rates that need to happen in those different outcomes. All in one place and fully supported by our mobile app that works in the paddock. If you would like to explore Atlas further, you can start a free trial. We have a 30-day free trial option, or you can book a demo with one of our team. We'd be happy to help you get set up and started with your property.
Thank you so much, Emily and Bart. That was a very comprehensive overview, and I know you go into even more detail in a one-on-one demo if anyone would like to book that with you and have a one-on-one session to get to understand what's in there. I guess, would you like to talk about what the roadmap looks like? I mean, one of the things that we pointed to earlier was that Atlas Grazing is built on a better architecture than Maia, so we know we can do faster and more improvements over time. And did you have any comments about what that looks like in future?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really good to keep in mind that this is the first iteration of Atlas Grazing. So it honestly is just the start. We have a really exciting and comprehensive roadmap out in front of us. So we are looking to continue to enhance the platform, richer features, better automations. And one of the points that you touched on, Vic, was the reason that we've gone down the path of rebuilding this architecture is so that we can actually support more integrations. So looking to include things like animal tracking, water monitoring, satellite imagery, virtual fencing, finance. These are all paths that we want to go down. And that's really, really exciting when it comes to the future of Atlas Grazing.
Amazing. Let's get into some Q&A. You've probably just answered a few of them actually already. I know that welcome Charlie Arnott to the webinar. He's asked a couple of questions about individual animal ID. So where are we at with that at the moment, and what does that look like?
Yeah, great question, and welcome, Charlie. Thank you for your question. So at the moment, we're still managing at that stock group level in Atlas Grazing, which is what we did in Maia. And as I sort of just touched on, with the new architecture that we have developed, we will have the capability down the track to look at integrating with EID options.
Amazing. Now, getting information into Atlas Grazing, what does that look like? We've had a question from Norbert in terms of importing Google Earth maps to get started. How does that work?
Yeah, great question. So Couple of different options here, and it really depends on what you would prefer to do. You can draw your maps in Atlas Grazing really, really easily, or if you have a file that will come across, our support team can help you get that sorted, absolutely.
Perfect. Bart, feel free to jump in whenever you have thoughts
Don't
and
let me take all the limelight, Bart.
thoughts and feelings. Let's have a look at some of other questions here. Alex asked about calculating long-term averages. Is this through satellite imagery? So I'm assuming he's talking about pasture availability. I know you were talking about things like satellite imagery potentially down the track. So how do you put in your estimates for feed and what does that process look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, couple of questions there. Feed estimations are really simple to to update. We've got new calculator tools that help you do that out in the paddock. And then in terms of your long-term averages, that's all calculated through the program.
And he asked about if this takes into improved pastures legumes. And of course, your feed estimates is reflective of what that looks like in terms of quality and quantity as well. Um, any thoughts on that, Bart? You look like you're thinking.
Oh, it was, yeah, absolutely right. This is critical stuff, and the world has changed so much. I think that there's oodles of data out there, but at a high level, not at a granular level per paddock. And one of the things that Maya absolutely fundamentally demonstrated is that the best data is the data that comes from people who observe animals going into a paddock and animals coming out of a paddock, and that's the best ground truthing that we can find when we put it up against any other form. And that's the place to start. And by making that easier, simpler, more repeatable, do it in your sleep, that's the win here. Now, can that be integrated and modeled and put through the smarts of what is now out there with the changes in universal data sets? Absolutely. But I will say, after looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of grazers as part of my role, the single best data truth out there is those graziers who know what the animals went into and what they came out with an observation of their own, put up against the thousands of grazers that actually measure the harvest as compared to other modelling. It's the best out there. Then calibrate that against that other modelling that's out there that we're looking to integrate with and build on the models for improved pasture, native pasture, extensive, intensive. Yeah, it's all pretty cool. But you've got to start, right? The thing that I would really just throw in there, people sit back and say, oh, when's the perfect push a button and tell me everything that's how it's going to look. That's not the case yet. You've still got to have a relationship to the country. You've still got to have a relationship to the paddock. You still got to have a relationship to the animal. That's what we're talking about here as well. It's not all sit in the cave and push buttons to drive animals around a farm, right? There's got to be the human element in that as well.
Very well said, Bart. Kirsty, one of our MaiaGrazing customers, has asked about subscriptions for MaiaGrazing and moving across to Atlas. So we'll work with you one-on-one, Kirsty, to do that. So just reach out to our support team, who I'm sure you already know, and we can chat to you individually about that as well. We've had a question about multiple users. How does that work, Emily, compared to what we had with Maia and now with Atlas?
Yeah, great question. So we can have unlimited users across all of our tiers on Atlas Grazing. So it means that we can also adjust our user permission roles. So we can give view only access up to like an account owner. So if you have, various contractors or maybe stakeholders in terms of accountants or different people who may need to see that information in your Atlas Grazing account, we can actually adjust what they can and can't see and do and add them as a user.
That's a good segue into talking about the tiers because that's
Yeah.
a new structure for us. Do you want to talk about the cost of that and how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as opposed to MaiaGrazing, where we sort of had an all or nothing approach with the Light or Pro accounts, we've actually restructured the pricing and the subscription tiers with Atlas Grazing. So we've got three tiers on Atlas Grazing. We've got Core, Management, and Performance. Core is our entry level tier, starts at $36 a month. It's designed to have really just the basic requirements in terms of record keeping, a little bit of graze planning, but just the basic record keeping more than anything else. And then management and performance is really where we start to step up into that grazing analytics, the forecasting, the richer, deeper insights that impact the business productivity ultimately. So it really just depends on your feature needs, your budget, but the good thing is that we've got something to suit everyone.
Amazing. The other question that I think is probably a good one is talking about different types of people to use Atlas Grazing. Jeff has asked if there are any dairy farmers using it, which I know you've spoken to some in the past. So do you want to talk about how it's applicable to different types of operations?
Yeah, I did actually have a chat with a dairy customer the other day, which is really exciting. So I think, if we bring this back to the core outcome that we're trying to drive by capturing this data, measuring these insights, using it to make decisions in our business, it's ultimately about juggling the supply and demand of our pasture. And I think anyone who is managing grass and managing livestock, that is what we need to be really effective at doing. And having those tools, having that data in your back pocket to do that, means that Atlas Grazing works for pretty much any operation.
Amazing. I know we're running out of time, so I think if anyone has further questions, we won't be able to get to everyone. Everyone's got lots of questions about it. Emily, I know you're always available to have either a chat on the phone, or if someone wants to book a one-on-one session with you over Zoom, you can go through their individual operation and see which of the 3 tiers suits best. But keen to hear your closing thoughts. I mean, you've been here from the start. How are you feeling about this new evolution?
It just makes sense. I think simpler has to win the race. And I think Emily nailed it too. Integrations. We always knew about the Internet of Things, but we found it hard to integrate. We have FarmBot linked up to Maya. That's great. It's been awesome. But more integrations, more capacity to link up with the likes of the weight ranges, modeling, endless numbers of opportunities on that front, and we can now do that seamlessly and far more quickly. So that's it for me, and I think that ultimately it's got to be around usability. It's got to be around mum and dad and the kids just being able to go bang bang. That's how we do it. We're doing it now. It's locked in. It's part of how this business runs, and we don't need to overcomplicate it. It's just as simple as that.
Amazing. Emily, any last thoughts from you?
No, I'm really excited. I'm just, excited to bring these tools to more people. I think it makes it simpler, faster, better to use this data in your own operation. So I just think that's invaluable when it comes to making decisions.
Perfect. Well, I will wrap up by talking about things that are upcoming. The latest episode of our podcast. If you didn't know, we had a podcast here at Atlas Ag called Stockyard Sessions. I interviewed Kent Rochester, who's down in the southwest of Western Australia, who's doing amazing things with virtual fencing down there, and the impact of his productivity is unreal on his livestock enterprise. We'll be at Wagyu Edge Conference in Brisbane from the 15th to the 17th of April, and we've got our next field day at Deepwater Station in New South Wales the following week on the 22nd of April. So that's a free field day, and it's really great. We've had so much feedback from those days to say how informative they are if you're keen to understand more about the soil carbon side of things, if you've heard about Atlas Carbon before, as part of the Atlas Ag umbrella that we sit under. But otherwise, I really appreciate both of you making the time today and sharing everything that you have built, Bart, and everything that you've learnt, Emily, through this process and taking it to the next stage of Atlas Grazing.
It's a big team, I'm the old guy. Thank you very much. It's a strong
Thanks,
team.
Vic, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks you all. Sorry, thanks to everybody for joining, and we will see you at the next webinar next month.
Thanks, Vic.